Good afternoon, students, and welcome to today's mini lecture on the mind and methods of the social scientist. I, of course, am your professor, Dr. Rob Stephan, and today we're going to take a deep dive into what it means to approach the ancient world through the disciplinary lens of the social sciences. So build your surveys, analyze those spreadsheets, create those models, and then journey with me as we investigate the social sciences. So what are the social sciences? Well, you might think of this as, well, exactly what it sounds like, right? Taking a scientific approach, but to people instead of nature. The social sciences systematically analyze how people think, behave, and impact the world around them. And all this happens at a variety of scales, everything from individual people to massive cultures and societies. It could be, for example, a psychologist developing an experiment to test how people think and behave. Or it could be an economist crunching data to better understand how interest rates impact economic behavior on a grand scale. Now, when it comes to the ancient world, a social scientist might be interested in understanding how individuals and societies behaved and evolved. In ancient Egypt, for example, a social scientist might be interested in understanding the way in which labor was organized for constructing the pyramids. Fun fact here, it was not in fact slaves who built the mighty pyramids of Giza. Other social scientists might look at the role of the pharaoh to determine how political power changed from the old to the middle to the new kingdoms in Egypt. And still other social scientists might be interested in the role of religion and the role that played in either increasing or mitigating socioeconomic inequality. Now, when it comes to the ancient Greek world, social scientists might be interested in the dynamics of colonization at the dawn of the Archaic period. Or they might look at the impact of political form, things like monarchy or oligarchy or tyranny or democracy, on the economic performance of classical city-states. Or they might be interested in trying to understand how democracy was created and how it grew and how it prospered. Now, the ancient Roman Empire was certainly grand in scale, and the Roman world more generally often suffered from serious revolts, rebellions, and even civil wars. And as a result, social scientists, they might be interested in understanding how marginalized groups, such as slaves or foreigners, worked towards social justice goals. They might look at the slave revolt of Spartacus, for instance, or the social wars of the early 1st century BC. Other social scientists might look at the impact that the spread of Roman political power had on economic transaction costs, documenting how trade networks grew and spread over time. So as you can see, social scientists are involved in understanding a pretty wide variety of human behavior. But how do they do it? What does it mean to approach ancient history like a social scientist? Well, social scientists employ a similar set of methodological approaches as natural scientists do. That is, they frequently set up experiments to test ideas about the way the world works. The big difference, of course, is that for social scientists, those experiments tend to focus on human behavior rather than natural phenomena. Let's take a look at a modern example. Sometimes these experiments are employed directly on human populations, and one of the most famous, of course, is Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments of the 1960s. Here, he brought in student volunteers and told them to deliver an electrical shock to a study participant if they answered a question incorrectly. The level of shock increased with each incorrect answer, turning up the electricity. And the markings on the controls went from mild to medium to danger to severe damage to XXX or death. Now, these weren't actually delivering a shock. But as the participants got more answers wrong, the voltage increased and they began to plead with students and they banged on the walls, eventually going silent and limp. Now, when the student shocker asked if they should keep going, they were told it was necessary. Now, of course, those experiments weren't about wrong answers, but rather about how far people will go to obey someone's commands. Well, we obviously can't run actual experiments on the behavior of dead people. The historical and archaeological evidence for the ancient world allows us to use a similar scientific method in which we pose questions, develop a hypothesis, gather data, that would either support or contradict that hypothesis, and then draw conclusions based on the results of that data. For example, one might want to test the impact of political form on the economic wealth in ancient Greek city-states. Now, to do this, a historian might list each city-state, label each city-state with its associated political form, and develop some sort of proxy evidence for the wealth of each city-state. Something like the size of the city, or the number of temples, or the number of coins found, or the number of inscriptions. Something along those lines. Now, after gathering the data, you could then run a statistical test to determine the extent to which political form, right, democracy, oligarchy, or monarchy, was associated with a level of wealth. Fun fact here, we've actually done this for ancient Greece. You can read Josiah Ober's Democracy and Knowledge. It was published in 2008, which shows that democracies were consistently wealthier than city-states with other forms of government. Now, social scientists also build models about human behavior, and then test whether those models that have been built actually hold up in a variety of scenarios. In many ways, this is just an extended form of the experimental process that we just talked about. One of the most famous models about the ancient Roman economy was created by the late great Keith Hopkins. He built a model saying that the way Rome grew and got rich was through taxing the provinces using coinage. This coin-based tax forced farmers, who might have previously had no use for coins, just bartering, to bring their goods to markets, to sell it for coins so that they could pay their taxes. As a result, markets grew. They grew larger, and trade networks expanded more robustly. This, in turn, spurred even more economic interaction, and the economy grew larger. This model, like any model, is a vast simplification of how things work. But that's the point. Identify the causal mechanisms in human and social behavior and change. Now, social scientists often work with large data sets, and they analyze those data sets quantitatively and systematically in order to test whether their theories hold up. In my dissertation, for example, I wanted to know whether the expansion of the Roman Empire brought with it increased wealth for, regular people like you and me. We know that Rome grew rich, but it's not quite clear whether all that wealth stayed at the very top, right? The top 1% of society, or whether everyone benefited from Roman political power. To test this, I measured every ancient house that we had archaeological evidence for in 3 different Roman provinces, building a database with literally thousands of houses. Then I tracked how house size changed over time to determine whether regular people's houses were growing larger and wealthier as Rome began to expand. I'll save you the suspense and the pain of reading the dissertation. And the answer, like all dissertations, is that it's complicated. In this case, because it turns out that what really matters is what you consider to be a house. You'd think it'd be straightforward, but it's anything but. So social scientists approach understanding the world much like a natural scientist, but they're focused on people rather than nature. The question then is, what does that get us? What do we learn by looking at the world, especially the ancient world, like a social scientist? Well, for one, we get a better understanding about the way that institutions impact societies in which people live. That is, we better understand how political form does impact economic or social or educational well-being. And from these investigations into the past, we get a better sense for what we should be doing in the present and how that can lead to a better future. So don't think that being a social scientist is for the bean counters and their accounting books. It's for all of us who want to understand and answer the fundamental questions about the nature of society and the role of individuals within that society. And in doing so, make the world a better place.